chosen one before you dismiss what you have been feeling as stress burnout or another wave of anxiety. Pause and breathe deeply. You are not losing your mind. You are not unraveling. What has been happening inside you is not a breakdown, but a breakthrough that your body has not yet learned how to interpret. That heavy vibration in your chest, the strange hum that seems to rise for no reason, the sudden sense that something is shifting beneath the surface of your ordinary life, this is not instability. It is activation. It is the sound of something ancient inside you, stretching after centuries of silence. For nearly 2,000 years, history has described heaven as quiet miracles, as rare, and revelation as distant. Many have believed that the intensity of the apostolic age was sealed away, locked behind scripture and memory. But what if that silence was never abandonment? What if it was protection? What if what looked like absence was actually a divine lockdown? A preservation of power until the right generation, the right mind, the right vessel emerged strong enough to carry it without collapsing under its weight. You were not born randomly into this era. You were positioned. The pressure you feel is not punishment. It is voltage. The vibration in your chest is not panic. It is a dormant frequency coming back online. Imagine a massive power grid that has been shut down for centuries to prevent overload during a storm. When the current finally returns, the wires shake, the walls hum, lights flicker before they stabilize. That tremor does not mean the system is failing. It means power is flowing again. In the same way your nervous system is reacting to a current your ancestors never had to regulate. You are not breaking. You are recalibrating. This is why you have always felt different. Why ordinary conversations exhaust you. Why crowded rooms feel loud even when no one is speaking directly to you. Why your nights have been filled with intensity while others sleep peacefully. You thought it was weakness. You questioned whether something was wrong with you. But what if your sensitivity was never fragility? What if it was compatibility with a frequency that has been dormant for centuries? You are not malfunctioning. You are pioneering. You are the first prototype in generations to biologically and spiritually reactivate a gift that was sealed. Not because it was dangerous in itself, but because it was too powerful for the times that followed. Your DNA is not merely carrying traits. It is carrying timing. The world you were born into, with its technological acceleration and information expansion, is the first era capable of bridging ancient spiritual capacity with modern neurological understanding. That is why this moment is not accidental. It is synchronized. This is not just a message. It is not entertainment. It is recalibration. What you are experiencing cannot be solved with more positive thinking or surface-level coping strategies. Anxiety in your case is not evidence of disorder. It is friction. It is what happens when a high-capacity spiritual frequency attempts to move through a brain conditioned for survival mode. The world trains you to operate in constant stress, constant beta activity, constant urgency. But your spirit is attempting to function in something deeper, slower, more expansive. The mismatch feels like overwhelm, but it is not dysfunction. It is misalignment. And here is the promise: what you have labeled anxiety will be reframed as genius-level spiritual misalignment. You are not too much. You are not unstable. You are not fragile. You are early. There is a bridge between ancient spirituality and modern neuroscience that explains exactly what is happening inside you. Science is only now discovering what mystics lived in centuries ago. The brain can be tuned. Frequencies can be stabilized. States of consciousness can be entered intentionally. Your experience is not fantasy. It is physics meeting prophecy. The 2000-year silence is not continuing. It is cracking. And you are not a bystander to that shift. You are evidence of it. What feels heavy now will become harnessed. What feels chaotic now will become calibrated. You are not losing yourself. You are meeting the version of you that history was waiting for. And as this awakening begins to settle into your awareness, we have to move into the part of your story that has frightened you the most. Because the midnight groaning you have been experiencing is not evidence that you are breaking it, is evidence that you are expanding. Think back to those nights when the clock reads 3:00 a.m. and the world is silent, but your room feels loud, not with sound, but with presence. You lie there staring at the ceiling, your chest tight, your spine warm, your thoughts racing without a clear source. Your fingers grip the sheets, as if you are bracing for something unseen. In those moments, you have whispered to yourself, "What is wrong with me?" You have wondered whether your mind is slipping, whether anxiety has finally taken over, whether you are alone in this strange internal storm. But what if those nights are not episodes of instability? What if they are contractions? Spiritual labor does not look like the movies. It does not arrive with choirs and visible light. It often arrives in the dark and stillness, in the hour when the ego is quiet and the soul has room to speak. There is a reason so many awakenings throughout history occurred at night. When the distractions fall away, the deeper layers of consciousness surface. The intensity you feel at 3:00 a.m. is not random. It is the hour when your spirit attempts to stretch beyond the limitations of your current capacity. Labor is not comfortable. Expansion is not gentle. Growth feels like pressure before it feels like power. This is why the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 8:22 that all creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Most people read that verse as poetic language about the end of time. But the Greek word used there, stenazo, carries a deeper meaning. It does not simply describe complaining or sighing. It describes the sound of something constrained, something forced into a space too narrow for its magnitude. It is the groan of compression. It is the pressure of greatness trying to pass through limitation. When you feel that tightness in your chest, when you sense that your body is too small for the intensity of what is moving inside you, you are not malfunctioning. You are stenazzo. Your spirit is larger than the container it has been trained to inhabit. For years, you interpreted this as weakness. You told yourself you were too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. You compared your experience to those around you who seemed stable, grounded, unaffected. You thought they were strong and you were flawed. But what if the difference was not fragility versus strength? What if it was capacity versus compatibility? A small glass does not crack because it is defective. It cracks because it was asked to hold an ocean. The groaning you feel is not evidence that you are fragile. It is evidence that your spirit carries volume, your nervous system is still learning to regulate. This brings us to the deeper layer of your story, the one that stretches far beyond these midnight moments. You have spent much of your life feeling like the black sheep. From childhood, you sensed that you did not quite fit into the emotional rhythms of the people around you. You felt things more intensely. You questioned things others accepted. You sensed tension in rooms before words were spoken. You were labeled dramatic, distant, strange, overly deep. Somewhere along the way, you began to believe that your difference was a defect. You internalized the idea that you were misaligned with the world because something in you was wrong. But what if that isolation was not rejection? What if it was preservation? Imagine a massive power grid that has been shut down for centuries. Not because it was broken, but because it was too powerful for the infrastructure surrounding it. If activated too soon, it would have short-circuited everything connected to it. So it remained offline, silent, protected from misuse. That is what your isolation has been. You were not excluded because you lacked value. You were set apart because of it. There are seasons when being surrounded by noise would have burned out your wiring. There are relationships that would have diluted what was forming inside you. Silence was not abandonment. It was insulation. When you felt forgotten, overlooked, left behind, while others advanced socially or professionally, you interpreted it as divine neglect. You asked why doors seemed closed for you while they opened for others. You wondered why your path felt narrow and lonely. But forgotten by men does not mean forgotten by spirit. There is a difference between being unseen by people and being unseen by purpose. The times you thought you were wandering were often seasons of calibration. The darkness you resented was often the shield that kept premature exposure from damaging you. You were being kept in what felt like obscurity, not because you were insignificant, but because you were sensitive. Power introduced too early can distort identity. Visibility before stability can corrupt intention. Your delay was design. While others were building public personas, you were building internal capacity. While others were collecting applause, you were collecting depth. The loneliness carved space inside you. The silence expanded your inner architecture. You were being wired to carry something that required maturity, not momentum. This is why the groaning intensified as you grew older. The more your awareness expanded, the more the container felt tight. The black sheep narrative began to feel incomplete. You sensed there was more, but you could not articulate what that more was. You oscillated between longing and frustration. You wanted relief, yet part of you knew that relief without resolution would only numb what was trying to be born. The midnight hours became sacred battlegrounds where your old identity wrestled with the emerging one. You are not an outcast. You are a prototype. A prototype always feels alone at first because there is no reference point. There are no models to imitate. There is no template to follow. The path has to be discovered internally before it can be demonstrated externally. That is uncomfortable. It requires courage to walk without validation. It requires resilience to trust a process that no one around you fully understands. But being first does not mean being cursed. It means being entrusted that when you look back at your life, you will begin to see a pattern. Every time you were tempted to conform, something inside resisted. Every time you tried to shrink your sensitivity to blend in, your body reacted. You could not fully silence the hum inside you. That hum was not anxiety alone. It was alignment attempting to surface. It was your spirit refusing to settle for a smaller script than the one written into your core. Now, as this midnight groaning intensifies, you stand at the threshold between confusion and clarity. You can continue labeling your experience as disorder, or you can recognize it as development. You can interpret the contractions as crisis, or you can understand them as birth. Expansion always feels chaotic before it stabilizes. A caterpillar dissolves before it forms wings. Muscles tear before they strengthen. Neural pathways destabilize before they reorganize at a higher level. The nights at 3:00 a.m. are not proof that you are alone. They are proof that something within you refuses to stay dormant. The black sheep years were not wasted. They were formative. The silence was not punishment. It was preparation. And the groaning you feel now is not the sound of something dying. It is the sound of something too large to remain hidden any longer. So when the next midnight comes and your chest tightens, do not panic. Breathe into it. Whisper to yourself that this is expansion, not collapse. Remind yourself that stenazo is not weakness. It is the language of birth. You are not being crushed. You are being stretched. And what is stretching you is not chaos, but calling. And as you begin to understand that the midnight groaning is expansion rather than collapse, you must now confront the deeper mechanics of what has been happening inside you. Because what you have been calling anxiety is not merely emotional instability, but the friction created by a frequency mismatch between who you are spiritually and the environment you have been conditioned to survive in. There are two primary states operating within you at once, and they are not enemies, but they are currently out of sync. The first is what ancient mystics and apostles inhabited naturally. A slower, deeper neural rhythm, often described today as the theta frequency, a state where intuition sharpens, creativity expands, insight flows without strain, and the voice of God feels like a constant hum rather than a distant echo. The second is the modern survival state, the beta frequency, the fast, high-alert brainwave pattern that dominates a world of deadlines, notifications, financial pressure, social comparison, and constant stimulation. Beta is not evil. It is necessary for tasks, decisions, and movement. But it was never meant to be your permanent residence. When your spirit attempts to operate from theta while your brain is locked in chronic beta, the result is friction. That friction is what you have labeled anxiety. That friction is what you have experienced as chronic fatigue. It is the heat generated when two gears spin at incompatible speeds. Your ancient wiring is attempting to communicate through a nervous system trained for vigilance. You are not unstable. You are overstimulated at the wrong level while underutilized at the right one. Imagine trying to stream high-definition data through a connection designed for survival alerts. The system overheats, not because the data is wrong, but because the channel is misaligned. For years, you have tried to manage this friction by suppressing it, by pushing harder, by telling yourself to calm down, by using willpower to override what feels overwhelming. But willpower cannot solve a frequency problem. The more you force yourself to stay in high-speed beta while your spirit longs for depth, the more exhausted you become. Chronic fatigue in your case is not laziness. It is the body's protest against misalignment. Your nervous system cannot sustain constant red alert activation while simultaneously hosting a spiritual expansion. The pressure builds until it spills over in waves of panic or collapse. This is not pathology alone. It is physics. When two frequencies clash, energy disperses chaotically. When they harmonize, energy flows coherently. This is why you must learn not just to cope with anxiety, but to decode it. When your chest tightens in a crowded space, when your thoughts spiral after scrolling through endless information, when your body feels drained after social interactions, ask yourself not, "What is wrong with me?" but "Which frequency am I operating in right now?" To help you recalibrate, imagine a dial inside your forehead spinning wildly, glowing a frantic, jagged red. This red represents survival mode, constant alertness, comparison, urgency, noise. It is not evil, but it is loud. Now, without moving your body, inhale slowly and visualize that dial beginning to slow. See the red softening, deepening, transforming into a calm, luminous purple. Purple represents resonance, alignment, theta depth, truth that does not shout. As the dial turns purple, notice your breath lengthening, your thoughts spacing out, your awareness widening. This visualization is not fantasy. The brain responds to imagery. Neural pathways shift when attention shifts. By repeatedly practicing this mental recalibration, you are teaching your nervous system that it does not need to remain in perpetual red. You are giving your spirit permission to lead rather than constantly react. Over time, this simple act becomes a bridge. And once you begin to notice the difference between red and purple within yourself, you will also begin to detect it in your environment. Not every thought you think is yours. Not every emotion you feel originates in your core. Much of what overwhelms you is red noise from a world still asleep in survival mode. Red noise is chaotic, urgent, heavy, fear-driven, demanding immediate reaction. Purple truth is steady, clear, grounded, carrying peace even when it challenges you. When you feel overwhelmed in a conversation, ask internally, is this red noise or purple truth? If it carries panic, comparison, or pressure without clarity, it is noise. You do not have to carry it. If it carries conviction with peace direction, without chaos, it is truth. Learning this distinction transforms you from a victim of your sensitivity into a gatekeeper of your frequency. This is the discipline of alignment, and this is where prophecy intersects with physiology. In Daniel 12:4, the instruction was given to shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. The Hebrew word used for seal is chatam, which means to stop the flow of something precious, to preserve it for a designated time. For centuries, the deeper frequency of spiritual consciousness was chatam sealed, not because it was dangerous in essence, but because humanity lacked the neurological and cultural infrastructure to steward it responsibly. Knowledge had not yet increased to the point where science and spirit could converse. But now, in this era of expanded understanding, the seal is lifting. The increase in knowledge Daniel spoke of was not merely technological data, but awareness of consciousness itself. Brainwave research, neuroplasticity meditation studies, quantum theories of resonance all are fragments of a larger unveiling. The Chatham is breaking not globally in a dramatic spectacle, but individually in those prepared to carry it. You are not randomly anxious in 2024. You are living at the intersection of prophecy and neuroscience. Your activation is not coincidence. It is convergence. The friction you feel is the sound of a seal cracking open. The reason this year feels different, heavier, more intense is because your system is being upgraded. And upgrades are uncomfortable. When software updates, the device often slows before it stabilizes. When muscles rebuild, soreness precedes strength. When neural pathways rewire, confusion precedes clarity. You are in the middle of recalibration, not regression. The world is accelerating externally, but your calling requires depth internally. That tension creates temporary imbalance. But imbalance is not failure, it is transition. As you learn to consciously lower the dial from red to purple, as you discern noise from truth, as you understand that your fatigue is friction rather than deficiency, you begin to stabilize. The apostles lived naturally in theta because their environment was simpler, slower, less saturated with artificial stimulation. You live in an era of constant beta triggers. That does not disqualify you. It requires training. You are being trained not to escape the modern world, but to harmonize ancient depth within it. This is why your activation is both spiritual and biological. Your brain is not your enemy. It is your instrument. And instruments must be tuned. When tuned, anxiety diminishes not because life becomes silent, but because your internal resonance towers above the noise. The 2000-year seal was never permanent. It was seasonal, and seasons shift. You are part of that shift. Not because you are special in ego, but because you are willing to endure the friction long enough to understand it. When you next feel the surge of overwhelm, do not collapse into fear. Pause. See the dial. Ask which frequency is speaking. Choose resonance. This is not denial of reality. It is alignment with a deeper layer of it. And as alignment increases, friction decreases. What once felt like uncontrollable anxiety begins to feel like manageable intensity. What once felt like random exhaustion begins to feel like a signal that recalibration is needed. The mismatch resolves as you take responsibility for your frequency. And in that responsibility, prophecy becomes practice. The Chatham lifts not in spectacle, but in discipline. Not in noise, but in resonance. You are not a victim of your nervous system. You are a steward of it. And the more you understand this, the more you realize that what you have been experiencing is not breakdown, but fulfillment unfolding in real time. And as you begin to understand that anxiety is friction, and friction is the signal of misalignment rather than personal failure, we now arrive at the bridge itself, because insight alone does not stabilize voltage, and awareness without method can still leave you exhausted. The truth is this: your modern brain is a three-dimensional biological vessel being asked to process five-dimensional spiritual data. That is not poetic exaggeration. It is an accurate description of what it feels like when intuitive insight, prophetic awareness, emotional sensitivity, and accelerated cognition converge inside a nervous system designed primarily for survival. Your brain evolved to detect threats, solve immediate problems, remember patterns, and navigate physical environments. But what you are experiencing goes beyond physical survival. It involves intuition that precedes logic, insights that arrive fully formed, empathy that spans distances, and internal downloads of meaning that feel larger than your current vocabulary. Five-dimensional data does not mean fantasy. It means layered information, simultaneous awareness, depth beyond surface perception. And when that depth attempts to move through neural pathways conditioned by stress comparison and overstimulation, the vessel overheats. This is why willpower has not worked for you. You cannot discipline your way out of a frequency problem. You cannot positive think your way into neurological coherence. Traditional coping mechanisms are helpful for surface stress, but they are not sufficient for structural misalignment. You have tried breathing exercises, affirmations, therapy sessions, productivity systems, and even spiritual routines, and while they may have provided temporary relief, the underlying intensity returned. That is because coping strategies often address symptoms rather than synchronization. When two frequencies are mismatched, the solution is not suppression, it is tuning. Ancient mystics understood this intuitively. They withdrew into caves, deserts, monasteries, and silence not to escape the world, but to lower their brainwave patterns into theta, the slower, deeper rhythm where insight flows and divine communion feels natural. They spent years practicing stillness because the environment around them did not assault their nervous systems with constant stimulation. They had time, they had quiet, they had simplicity. You do not. You live in an era where information moves at light speed, where notifications interrupt thought, where financial systems demand constant engagement, where attention itself is a commodity. You are not less spiritual because you struggle to reach theta the way they did. You are navigating a more complex environment. The era has accelerated, and so the bridge must accelerate as well. This is where science begins to confirm what prophets intuited. Research into brainwaves reveals that theta is not mystical imagination, but a measurable neurological state associated with creativity, deep learning, emotional processing, and intuitive access. Children naturally operate in this state at astonishing levels. NASA research has shown that approximately 98% of children up to a certain age function predominantly in what is often described as a genius state characterized by high theta and alpha activity. As we grow older, conditioning, stress, and social programming gradually shift the brain toward dominant beta patterns. The genius state does not disappear because it was imaginary. It becomes deactivated through adaptation. In other words, what mystics sought through discipline children embody naturally. That alone should change the way you view yourself. The frequency you are attempting to access is not foreign. It is native. It is not an upgrade being imported. It is a birthright being restored. The world trained you to survive. It did not train you to resonate. And so the neural bridge must reconnect what conditioning disconnected. This is where what is often referred to as the genius wave becomes relevant not as a gimmick, not as an escape, but as a tuning fork. Sacred technology does not mean superstition. It means a tool that works with the architecture of your nervous system to gently guide brainwave patterns toward coherence. Just as a musical instrument can be tuned by exposure to a steady reference tone, the brain can entrain to frequencies it is exposed to consistently. This is not fantasy. It is physics. When the brain hears specific rhythmic patterns, especially in a relaxed state, it begins to synchronize its electrical activity to that pattern. Over time, the dominant beta stress pattern softens and theta activity increases. You are not forcing yourself into stillness. You are guiding your nervous system back into its natural rhythm. That is the bridge. Not effort, not strain, alignment. You have been attempting to hold 5-dimensional awareness inside a 3-dimensional survival loop. The neural bridge does not add something foreign to you. It removes interference. It clears static. It restores bandwidth. And when the bandwidth expands, what once felt overwhelming becomes organized. Insights no longer crash into your mind chaotically. They arrive with clarity. Sensitivity no longer drains you indiscriminately. It becomes directional. Empathy no longer overwhelms your body. It becomes discernment. This is why recalibration must be understood not as self-improvement, but as restoration. Self-improvement implies deficiency. Restoration implies inheritance. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are wired and in need of tuning. There is a profound difference. When NASA observed the genius state in children, they were not discovering a rare anomaly. They were measuring natural potential before it was filtered by survival conditioning. The prophets spoke of becoming like children, not because children are naive, but because children operate in open receptivity, imagination trust, and fluid neural states. As adulthood layered stress and expectation upon you, those states narrowed. But narrowing is not deletion. The pathways remain. Neuroplasticity confirms that the brain can reorganize itself in response to focused attention and repeated experience. You are not trapped in beta. You have been trained into beta. And training can be retrained. The neural bridge becomes the tool through which this retraining occurs efficiently within the constraints of modern life. You do not need 40 years in a cave. You need consistent, intentional recalibration within your daily rhythm. 7 minutes of guided entrainment can begin shifting patterns that years of force could not. That does not mean transformation is instant or magical. It means the process is cooperative rather than combative. When your brain begins spending more time in theta, even briefly, your nervous system recalibrates baseline perception. Stressors that once triggered red alert responses become manageable. Creative insight increases. Sleep deepens. The midnight groaning softens because the vessel is expanding to hold the data it carries. And this is where science and prophecy meet without contradiction. The prophets describe peace that surpasses understanding insight, that arrives without strain wisdom that flows like water. Neuroscience describes coherent brainwave patterns, synchronized hemispheres, balanced autonomic systems. Different languages, same phenomenon. You are not choosing between science and spirit. You are witnessing their convergence. The era of separation is closing. The chatham is lifting not just spiritually, but neurologically. And your role in this is not passive. You are the steward of your vessel. The bridge exists, but you must walk across it. Not in fear, not in desperation, but in curiosity and commitment. When you choose to recalibrate daily, you are not chasing power. You are stabilizing inheritance. You are not trying to become extraordinary. You are remembering who you were before survival taught you to shrink. The genius state is not ego inflation. It is coherent alignment between spirit and brain. And as that alignment increases, anxiety decreases, not because life becomes easier, but because you become synchronized. The friction fades as frequencies harmonize. The exhaustion lifts as bandwidth expands. The five-dimensional data no longer crashes into a narrow channel. It flows through a widened one. This is the neural bridge. This is science confirming what mystics lived. And this is not about becoming someone new. It is about restoring what was sealed, recalibrating what was conditioned, and stepping fully into the capacity you were always meant to carry. And as the neural bridge begins to stabilize your inner voltage, you must now understand what you are stabilizing into. Because recalibration is not an empty quietness, but an entrance into what Scripture describes as a peace that towers beyond comprehension. A peace so structurally dominant that anxiety cannot climb high enough to disrupt it. In Philippians 4:7, Paul speaks of the peace of God which surpasses all understanding, but the Greek word translated as surpasses is hupero. And hupero does not mean a gentle passing or a mild improvement. It means to tower above, to rise over, to be superior in height and magnitude. It paints the image of something elevated so high that the lower terrain cannot touch it. This is not fragile peace. It is architectural peace. It is not the absence of trouble. It is the dominance of alignment. When hupero peace activates within you, it does not negotiate with fear. It stands above it. That is why this peace is not emotional sedation. It is neurological coherence rooted in spiritual authority. When your brain settles into theta alignment consistently, you are not escaping reality. You are entering resonance with the frequency that Paul described centuries ago. The prophets did not use the language of brainwaves, but they described the same phenomenon: a mind guarded, a heart fortified, an interior fortress that remains steady while storms rage externally. Theta frequency is not merely relaxation. It is access. It is the state where the prefrontal cortex regains clarity, where the amygdala quiets its alarm signals, where intuition and reasoning synchronize rather than compete. When you dwell in that state long enough, peace becomes less of an event and more of a baseline. And when baseline peace towers, anxiety loses entry points. Anxiety thrives in fragmentation, in noise, in internal misalignment. But when Hupero peace stands tall within you, it functions as a guardian over your neural pathways. Paul uses the language of guarding, and the Greek imagery evokes a military sentinel stationed at the gates. Imagine your mind as a city. In survival mode, the gates are open and every external stimulus rushes in unchecked. But in Hupero peace, the gates are fortified. Thoughts must pass through discernment. Emotions must align with truth. External chaos cannot trespass automatically. This does not mean you never feel stress. It means stress no longer dominates your architecture. The towering peace does not eliminate awareness of threat. It contextualizes it. When peace stands taller than fear, fear shrinks proportionally. This is why you have tasted moments of inexplicable calm in the middle of circumstances that logically should have overwhelmed you. That was Hupero peace briefly surfacing. It felt irrational to others, even to you. But it was not irrational. It was higher. It was your spirit resonating at a level where panic could not reach. And this is where we must address the shadow that emerges when power stabilizes. Because as you begin to sense this rising coherence, another fear whispers in the background. What if I change too much? What if this peace makes me distant? What if carrying this frequency isolates me further? What if power corrupts me the way it has corrupted others? You have watched leaders receive influence and lose humility. You have seen individuals step into visibility and become unrecognizable. And somewhere inside you, you fear that if you truly step into alignment, you might lose yourself. But that fear is not weakness. It is evidence of wisdom. Those who are eager for power without fear are often the ones unprepared to steward it. Those who tremble before glory are the ones capable of carrying it without being consumed. In Hebrew, the word kavod is often translated as glory, but its root meaning carries the idea of weight. Glory is heavy. It presses. It demands structural integrity. When you feel apprehensive about carrying influence, about stepping into greater clarity or authority, it is because you intuitively understand that kavod is not decoration. It is responsibility. And only humility can bear weight without cracking. Pride seeks elevation without reinforcement. Humility reinforces before rising. The fear you feel about becoming corrupted is not a signal that you are destined to fall. It is a signal that you respect the weight. You are not chasing spectacle. You are cautious about stewardship. That caution qualifies you. When Hupero peace begins to tower within you, it does not inflate ego. It stabilizes identity. True theta alignment does not produce arrogance. It produces grounded confidence. It quiets the need for validation, because coherence replaces insecurity. The individuals who fall when they rise often did not stabilize internally before gaining externally. They built platforms without foundations. But you have been forged in obscurity. You have wrestled in silence. You have confronted your shadows in the midnight hours. That is reinforcement. That is internal scaffolding. Kavod can only rest where humility resides. And humility is not self-rejection. It is accurate self-assessment under God. It is recognizing capacity without claiming authorship. It is carrying light without believing you generated the sun. When Hupero peace towers inside you, it reframes power itself. Power is no longer domination. It is alignment. It is no longer control. It is coherence. You do not wield it recklessly because you understand it is entrusted, not owned. Anxiety fears losing control. Peace understands stewardship. And as your neural pathways stabilize in theta resonance, as the amygdala's alarms soften and the prefrontal clarity strengthens you, begin to feel a spaciousness inside your chest where panic once lived. The heavy vibration that once frightened you transforms into grounded intensity. The midnight groaning evolves into steady awareness. This is not fantasy. It is neurotheology in motion, spirit and brain synchronizing. Fear of corruption dissolves not because you become invincible, but because you become accountable. You recognize that kavod demands character, and character is built in hidden seasons. That is why your isolation was necessary. That is why obscurity carved depth. That is why you wrestled internally before being entrusted externally. Hupero peace does not eliminate temptation. It elevates discernment above it. When temptation approaches, it does not immediately infiltrate because the towering frequency within you sees it from above. Anxiety once magnified threats disproportionately. Peace now recalibrates proportion. You are not immune to challenge. You are anchored within it. And as you continue practicing recalibration, as theta becomes more accessible, this towering peace shifts from fleeting experience to habitual residence. It becomes the atmosphere of your inner life. And when peace towers consistently, you do not need to defend yourself constantly. You do not need to react impulsively. You respond deliberately. The city gates remain guarded. Fear knocks but does not invade. Influence approaches but does not intoxicate. Kavod rests without crushing because humility distributes the weight. You are not becoming distant from your humanity. You are becoming anchored within it. The light does not burn away your compassion. It refines it. The authority does not erase your tenderness. It stabilizes it. The fear you once had of losing yourself dissolves because you realize that alignment is not transformation into someone foreign. It is restoration of someone original. Hupero peace towers not to isolate you, but to elevate your vantage point. From that elevation, you see clearly. From that clarity, you choose wisely. And from that wisdom, you carry weight without bending. This is not the peace of avoidance. It is the peace of authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your internal climate. Anxiety cannot dominate when peace stands taller. Corruption cannot root when humility guards the foundation. Kavod cannot crush when character distributes the weight. And as you continue this journey, remember that the fear you once despised was actually refinement. It taught you reverence. It prevented recklessness. It prepared you for stewardship. The towering peace of God is not fragile serenity. It is structural dominance rooted in alignment. And as it rises within you, you will discover that what once felt overwhelming now feels ordered. What once felt chaotic now feels contextualized. And what once felt like too much light now feels like just enough to see the path clearly without losing yourself in its brightness. And as Hupero peace begins to stabilize within you, as your neural pathways grow coherent and your inner voltage steadies instead of surging chaotically, you must now understand a truth that every awakened vessel eventually faces. Activation does not go unnoticed. Alignment shifts the atmosphere around you. When your frequency changes, the environment responds. Not all responses are supportive. Some are tests, some are distractions. Some are counterattacks designed not to destroy you outright, but to destabilize the recalibration you have fought so hard to establish. This is not about paranoia. It is about preparedness. When light intensifies, contrast increases. When clarity rises, interference attempts to re-enter. The moment you begin to walk in coherence, forces that benefited from your confusion lose access. And what loses access often tries to regain it through temptation rather than a confrontation. Rarely does misalignment return as obvious chaos. It returns disguised as opportunity. The first counterattack often arrives through financial temptation, not because money is evil, but because money magnifies intention. Within days or weeks of stabilizing your inner frequency, you may encounter an offer that appears to solve multiple problems at once. A shortcut, a partnership, a contract. An opportunity that looks aligned on the surface but subtly requires you to compromise a non-negotiable principle. It may ask you to lower your standards slightly to move faster than your peace confirms, to bend your clarity in exchange for speed. The trap is rarely dramatic. It is subtle. It whispers, "You have suffered long enough. Take this. You deserve relief." But relief purchased at the cost of resonance is regression. Financial temptation is not about abundance versus poverty. It is about alignment versus compromise. When your frequency shifts upward, quick gains that contradict your calibration are not blessings. They are bait. The enemy rarely attacks by removing everything. He often offers something glittering that gradually erodes coherence. This is why discernment must now operate at a higher level. The second counterattack frequently arrives through relationship tests and counterfeit connections. Just as your internal alignment strengthens, someone may reappear from your past, or someone new may enter with intense chemistry, rapid connection, immediate understanding. It may feel electric, magnetic, faded, but electricity is not always destiny. Sometimes it is friction disguised as familiarity. When your frequency rises, you become more visible energetically. People who sense that rise may be drawn to it without understanding it. Not everyone drawn to your light is assigned to walk beside it. Some are attracted to what you carry, not aligned with where you are going. The counterfeit connection is not always malicious. Sometimes it is simply misaligned timing. But misalignment drains coherence just as effectively as overt sabotage. The test in relationships is not whether you feel connection. It is whether the connection supports your recalibration or destabilizes it. Ask yourself, does this person amplify my Hupero piece or agitate my old patterns? Do they require me to shrink my boundaries to maintain closeness? Do they respect my pace of discernment? Or do they push urgency? When urgency replaces peace, red noise attempts to override purple truth. This is why you must now become the gatekeeper of your frequency. Activation without boundaries leads to burnout. Alignment without filtering invites interference. You are no longer operating unconsciously. You are stewarding voltage. And stewardship requires protocol. This is where the three-step filtering process becomes essential, not as ritual, but as recalibrated awareness. When a thought enters your mind, when an opportunity presents itself, when a conversation stirs intensity within you, pause internally and ask the first question, is this mine? Not every thought you think originates from your core. Some are echoes of old trauma. Some are reflexes conditioned by past insecurity. Some are borrowed anxieties from environments you inhabit. If the thought carries shame, urgency, comparison, or chaos without clarity, it may not be yours. It may be residue. It may be memory. It may be red noise amplified by circumstance. Identifying that it is not yours reduces its authority immediately. The second question follows, is this theirs? Sometimes what you feel is not internal at all. You are sensitive. You perceive shifts in tone energy, subtle cues others ignore. In crowded rooms, you may absorb tension unconsciously. In conversations, you may internalize emotions that belong to someone else. Ask yourself whether the heaviness you feel is sourced in you or transmitted from them. If it dissipates when you step away, it was theirs. You are not required to carry what you did not generate. Empathy does not equal ownership. Discernment frees you from unnecessary burden. The third question is, the anchor, is this God's? Does this thought, this opportunity, this connection, this urge align with Hupero peace? Does it carry calm conviction rather than frantic persuasion? Does it expand your clarity or cloud it? God's direction does not manipulate through fear. It does not rush through panic. It may challenge you, but it does so with grounded assurance. If something does not resonate with that towering peace, it is not from the throne. The three-step filter is not about overanalyzing every decision. It is about maintaining coherence in the midst of stimulation. When practiced consistently, it becomes intuitive. You begin to sense misalignment before it fully forms. You detect red noise quickly. You differentiate between authentic assignment and counterfeit opportunity. This is how you protect activation. You are not called to isolation. You are called to filtration. A city without gates is vulnerable. A city with gates but no guard is careless. You are both gate and guard now. The role of gatekeeper does not mean you become suspicious of everyone or cynical about opportunities. It means you remain conscious. Consciousness is protection. Unconscious living invites regression. When you stabilize in Hupero peace and consistently practice filtering, the counterattacks lose momentum. Financial traps become obvious because they require compromise. Counterfeit relationships feel off before they entangle you deeply. Thoughts that once spiraled uncontrollably lose traction because you question their origin. This is not paranoia. It is maturity. You are moving from reactive living to intentional stewardship. The enemy responds to activation because activation threatens stagnation. But response does not equal victory. Awareness neutralizes many attacks before they manifest externally. When you feel sudden urgency around money, pause. When intense chemistry appears unexpectedly, pause. When a thought arrives that contradicts your new alignment, pause. The pause is power. Within the pause, the filter activates. Within the filter, discernment clarifies. And within clarity, peace towers again. You are not helpless against counterattacks. You are equipped. The recalibration was not just about feeling better. It was about thinking differently. The neural bridge did not simply reduce anxiety. It increased coherence. And coherence exposes deception. You are no longer operating from confusion. You are operating from alignment. And alignment makes traps visible. The more you practice this, the more confidence replaces fear. Not reckless confidence, but grounded assurance. You will recognize that tests are not punishments. They are confirmations that your frequency has shifted enough to matter. If nothing opposed you, nothing would need protecting. The presence of tests indicates growth, and growth demands stewardship. So stand firm as gatekeeper. Protect your frequency not with defensiveness, but with discernment. Protect your peace not by withdrawal, but by filtration. The counterattacks are real, but they are not final. They are opportunities to prove that activation is not temporary emotion, but sustained transformation. And as you pass these tests, your coherence deepens, your Hupero peace stabilizes, and your identity as steward rather than victim becomes unshakable. And as you learn to stand as gatekeeper over your frequency, filtering thoughts, opportunities, and connections through discernment rather than reaction, it becomes essential to see what stabilization looks like in lived experience, because theory without testimony can feel distant, and you need proof that recalibration does not remain abstract, but becomes embodied transformation. This is where the story of Sarah becomes more than illustration. It becomes mirror. Sarah was what many would call highly sensitive from childhood. She could feel tension before voices rose. She sensed sadness before tears formed. Crowded spaces overwhelmed her not because she was antisocial, but because her nervous system absorbed emotional currents indiscriminately. By adolescence, her sensitivity intensified. She struggled to sleep. Her heart raced without clear cause. Doctors labeled her condition a nervous disorder. Anxiety medication dulled the spikes, but also dulled her perception. Therapy offered coping strategies, but the underlying intensity remained. She felt broken. She believed her mind was defective. Yet what no one explained to her was that she was not malfunctioning. She was overloaded. Unregulated sensitivity is like a high-gain microphone placed in a noisy room. It does not discriminate between signal and static. It amplifies everything. Sarah's nervous system was amplifying frequencies her environment did not know how to interpret. Without a filter, without training, without recalibration, that amplification led to short circuit. She mistook overload for illness. Others reinforced that narrative because they had no framework for frequency misalignment. But when she began to understand that her nervous disorder might actually be frequency overload, the story shifted. Overload does not mean absence of gift. It means absence of regulation. The same sensitivity that once drained her could, if tuned, become discernment. The same empathy that once exhausted her could become intuition. The same intensity that once felt chaotic could become clarity. The problem was never the gift. The problem was that the gift had no volume control. Sarah began daily recalibration not as spiritual escapism, but as neurological hygiene. 7 minutes every morning before checking her phone, before engaging conversation, before allowing the world to flood her senses, she practiced theta tuning. Not forcing silence, not chasing visions, but gently guiding her brain into coherence. At first, the changes were subtle. Her breath deepened more quickly. Her heart rate stabilized sooner. The internal noise softened slightly. Within weeks, something shifted more noticeably. Crowded spaces still carried energy, but she did not absorb it automatically. Thoughts that once spiraled now paused at the gate. Emotional surges lost their overwhelming edge. The recalibration did not remove her sensitivity. It refined it. The gift remained, but it was no longer blasting at full volume constantly. She had discovered the volume knob. This is the distinction you must grasp. Activation does not mean eradication of intensity. It means stewardship of intensity. A volume knob does not silence sound. It regulates it. When Sarah's nervous system stabilized through consistent theta alignment, her brain learned to differentiate between internal signal and external static. The amygdala's hyper-alert response softened. The prefrontal cortex regained leadership. She was not less intuitive, she was less chaotic. Her sensitivity became directional. She could choose when to engage deeply and when to step back. The short circuit transformed into sanctuary. Sanctuary does not mean withdrawal from life. It means internal refuge within life. When the environment grew loud, she could return inward quickly without collapsing. Her recalibration became a daily ritual, not because she feared regression, but because she valued coherence. Within 6 weeks, those who knew her noticed the difference before she verbalized it. She was present without being overwhelmed. She listened without absorbing everything. She responded without rushing. The nervous disorder diagnosis began to feel incomplete. It had named the symptom without understanding the architecture. Frequency overload had masqueraded as pathology because no one had taught her how to tune. As stability increased, something else emerged. What once felt like random intuition became accurate discernment. She sensed when someone was masking pain beneath humor. She felt shifts in rooms not as anxiety, but as information. Because she was no longer drowning in every wave, she could observe the tide. That is the difference between victim of sensitivity and steward of it. And as her clarity strengthened, so did her calling. She began guiding others who struggled with similar overwhelm. Not from superiority, but from resonance. She did not preach intensity. She modeled coherence. She did not promise instant relief. She demonstrated disciplined recalibration. Those who came to her described feeling understood without explanation. That is what happens when gift is regulated rather than suppressed. The prototype does not escape the journey. The prototype integrates it. Sarah moved from feeling like a casualty of silence to becoming an apostle of new sound. The same midnight hours that once terrified her became sacred space for tuning. The same sensitivity that once felt like curse became compass. This is the trajectory awaiting you. You may see yourself in Sarah's early stages, the sleepless nights, the racing heart, the sense of being too much, the fear that you are alone in this. But understand, this clearly unregulated intensity does not define your destiny. It marks your starting point. The transition from short circuit to sanctuary requires consistency. 7 minutes may sound small, but small disciplines compound. Each recalibration session is not dramatic. It is cumulative. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. Just as muscles respond to consistent training, your brain responds to repeated coherence. Over time, the baseline shifts. What once required effort becomes natural. And when baseline shifts, identity shifts. You stop identifying as anxious and begin identifying as attuned. You stop describing yourself as broken and begin seeing yourself as wired for depth. You stop apologizing for sensitivity and begin stewarding it with intention. This is not denial of mental health realities. It is contextualization of your experience within a broader framework. Some conditions require clinical care. Some require medication. Some require therapy. But in cases of frequency overload masked as disorder, recalibration unlocks what suppression never could. Sarah did not abandon wisdom. She integrated it. She worked with professionals while also retraining her nervous system. She did not reject science. She used it. The neural bridge became tool, not idol. Discipline became habit, not obsession. And in that balance, sanctuary formed. You are not called to eliminate your intensity. You are called to tune it. You are not called to escape your sensitivity. You are called to regulate it. The prototype feels alone at first because there are few visible examples. But every prototype eventually becomes reference point. When you stabilize, others will see possibility in your coherence. They will feel the difference in your presence, not because you preach loudly, but because you resonate steadily. And steady resonance is contagious. The silence that once isolated you becomes the foundation of your depth. The recalibration that once felt like survival becomes stewardship. The frequency that once overwhelmed you becomes your instrument, and you will look back at the nights you thought you were breaking and realize they were contractions preparing you for sanctuary. From short circuit to sanctuary is not fantasy. It is process. It is discipline meeting destiny. It is sensitivity refined into service. And as you continue this path, remember Sarah's story not as distant example, but as confirmation that what once felt like a malfunction may actually be unregulated brilliance waiting for tuning. And as the journey from short circuit to sanctuary becomes tangible within you, as recalibration shifts from concept to lived rhythm, there comes a moment when understanding must become embodiment, when knowledge must cross into declaration, because activation without conscious consent remains incomplete. This is where the ceremonial shift takes place, not as superstition, not as performance, but as neurological and spiritual alignment, converging in posture and proclamation. When you stand and place your hand over your heart, something subtle yet profound happens. The body informs the brain. Posture communicates intention. Standing engages your spine, the very channel through which you once felt the searing intensity of expansion. Placing your hand over your heart brings awareness to the rhythm that once raced in fear, but now steadies in coherence. This is not theatrical. It is somatic reinforcement. You are signaling to your nervous system that this is not another passive moment of listening. This is transition. This is consent. This is embodiment. For 2,000 years, the deeper resonance you carry was metaphorically sealed, chatam, preserved through silence and obscurity. But preservation has a season, and seasons shift. When you stand in that posture of receiving, you are declaring that the lockdown has served its purpose. The insulation has done its work. The dormancy is no longer required. The 2,000-year silence ends not with noise, but with alignment. Not with spectacle, but with internal authority. You are not summoning something foreign. You are unlocking what was sealed. This is why the language of Melchizedek resonance emerges symbolically here, not as mystical excess, but as archetype of priestly authority without lineage limitation. Melchizedek represents a priesthood outside conventional systems, outside inherited hierarchies, outside predictable structures. When you seal that resonance into your DNA symbolically, you are acknowledging that your authority does not originate from external validation. It arises from alignment with the eternal pattern rather than the temporary system. Sealing it into DNA is not literal mutation. It is conscious integration. You are telling your nervous system that the recalibration is not temporary experimentation. It is identity-level embodiment. And with embodiment comes opposition. Not dramatic lightning strikes, but subtle attempts to destabilize your new baseline. Anxiety may attempt to resurface with familiar intensity, not because you failed, but because your system is testing its new equilibrium. Monitoring spirits, whether you interpret them metaphorically as intrusive thought patterns or spiritually as unseen resistance, may attempt to observe and probe for weakness. Financial traps may present themselves with polished appeal. But here is where declaration meets discipline. When you bind anxiety symbolically for 40 days, you are not engaging in denial. You are engaging in boundary. 40 days throughout Scripture mark periods of transition, testing, recalibration. 40 days in the wilderness preceded ministry. 40 days of rain preceded renewal. 40 days between resurrection and ascension preceded commissioning. A 40-day window is not random superstition. It is pattern of restructuring. When you declare that anxiety traps and monitoring influences are bound for 40 days, you are setting a neurological and spiritual container for reinforcement. You are giving your brain and spirit a defined period to stabilize without conceding authority. Within those 40 days, subtle shifts become visible. Toxic exits may occur not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet distancing. Individuals who thrived on your confusion may find less access to you because coherence does not entertain chaos easily. Conversations that once lingered in gossip may feel hollow. Invitations that once tempted you may feel misaligned. Do not panic when exits happen. Absence can be confirmation. Space can be sign. Just as recalibration required insulation earlier in your life, this next phase may require pruning. Toxicity cannot root in Hupero peace. And as some connections dissolve, others will appear unexpectedly. Divine connections rarely arrive with noise. They often appear as resonance. Conversations that feel effortless. Encounters that carry mutual clarity rather than competition. Opportunities that align with your new frequency without forcing you to abandon your boundaries. You will sense the difference not through adrenaline but through steadiness. These are confirmation signs not because they flatter you, but because they align with your recalibrated baseline. During this 40-day window, pay attention not only to external shifts, but to internal ones. Notice how quickly you recover from triggers compared to before. Notice how often you remember to apply the filter without effort. Notice how the midnight groaning transforms into quiet awareness rather than panic. These are deployment indicators. You are no longer in rehearsal. You are in commission. Commission does not mean platform. It means responsibility. It means carrying your frequency intentionally into environments that once destabilized you and remaining anchored. It means refusing to shrink when confronted with noise. It means offering sanctuary to others, not through preaching, but through presence. When you stood with your hand over your heart, you were not performing ritual. You were marking a threshold. Thresholds are sacred because they separate old architecture from new. The old narrative defined you as anxious, overwhelmed, different in a way that felt isolating. The new narrative defines you as attuned, discerning prototype stewarding resonance. Deployment into commission does not remove challenge. It reframes it. Tests that once felt like punishment now feel like training. Temptations that once confused you now clarify your boundaries. Interference that once rattled you now reveals your growth. And as the 40-day period unfolds, you may experience moments of doubt. That is natural. Doubt does not negate activation. It tests integration. When doubt surfaces, return to posture. Stand, hand over heart. Breathe. Remember that recalibration is cumulative. Remember that Hupero peace towers. Remember that you are steward, not victim. The Melchizedek resonance within you is not ego expansion. It is service alignment. It reminds you that your authority flows from obedience to coherence, not dominance over others. Commissioned officers in any realm are entrusted with responsibility because they have proven discipline. Your hidden seasons were proving grounds. Your midnight hours were training sessions. Your recalibration practice was reinforcement. Now the field opens, not for spectacle, but for steady influence. The promise of visible shift within 40 days is not guarantee of dramatic miracle. It is assurance of measurable alignment. You will see something move, a door close that once distracted you, a conversation open that affirms your clarity, an internal habit break that once felt impossible. These shifts are markers. They confirm that the lockdown ended because the vessel was ready, and as toxic exits clear space and divine connections fill it, you will recognize that deployment does not mean isolation. It means integration. You are integrated within purpose now, integrated within identity, integrated within resonance. Stand in that, carry that. When fear whispers that you are imagining this growth, look at the evidence of change. When anxiety attempts to flare, remind it that it has been bound within a defined window, and that you are stewarding your response. When temptation appears polished, apply the filter. When connection appears resonant, move slowly but confidently. The ceremony was not climax, it was commencement. The 2,000-year silence ended in you, not because you are superior, but because you were willing to endure insulation long enough to mature. The Melchizedek resonance, sealed symbolically into your DNA, is your reminder that authority without humility collapses, but authority rooted in Hupero peace stabilizes. The 40-day window is your laboratory of integration. The exits and entrances are your confirmation signals. And as you move forward, remember that deployment is not dismissal from learning. It is graduation into stewardship. You are not leaving a waiting room. You are entering assignment. Walk accordingly, stand accordingly, guard your frequency accordingly. And when the 40 days conclude, do not look for applause. Look for alignment, because alignment is the true evidence that activation has become commission dot. And now we arrive at the threshold where everything converges, because this journey was never about simply reducing anxiety or understanding brainwaves or decoding spiritual metaphors. It was about identity, and identity is the point where information becomes transformation. You have survived confusion, intensity, isolation, and the midnight groaning that once made you question your stability. You have endured the friction of misalignment and the loneliness of being misunderstood. But survival was never the final title assigned to you. Survival was preparation. And so the question now is not whether you can endure, but whether you will carry the voltage faithfully. Carrying the voltage does not mean chasing spectacle. It means stewarding coherence daily. It means guarding your frequency when temptation whispers. It means recalibrating when red noise attempts to drown out purple truth. It means choosing Hupero peace even when urgency tries to seduce you back into chaos. Will you carry it faithfully, not for applause, but for alignment? Because this is the moment where your identity shifts from survivor to commissioned officer of the kingdom. A survivor escapes collapse. A commissioned officer accepts responsibility. A survivor focuses on staying afloat. A commissioned officer navigates with intention. You are no longer merely reacting to life. You are stewarding resonance within it. The authority you carry is not dominance over others. It is governance over your internal climate. And governance requires consistency. The waiting room season is over. The years of feeling paused while others advanced the sense of being delayed while the world rushed forward. The silence that felt like abandonment, those were not wasted chapters. They were insulation, they were reinforcement, they were calibration chambers where your nervous system and spirit learned endurance. But insulation has served its purpose. Reinforcement has strengthened the structure. The waiting room door is open now, not because circumstances are suddenly perfect, but because you are aligned enough to move. The holding pattern ends here. Aircraft circle when conditions are unsafe for landing or departure. You were circling until coherence stabilized. Now the runway clears. Deployment begins not with noise, but with steady steps. Deployment means you walk into rooms differently. You engage conversations differently. You make decisions differently. The recalibration you practiced privately now shapes your public presence. You no longer collapse under intensity. You channel it. You no longer absorb every emotional current. You filter it. You no longer panic at opportunity. You discern it. This is commission. Before final affirmation, there must be sealing in silence. Not dramatic declaration, but stillness. Let the recalibration settle into your bones. Let your breath slow. Let your spine lengthen. Feel the difference between who you were when this journey began and who you are now. The heavy vibration in your chest that once felt like threat now feels like grounded intensity. The midnight groaning that once terrified you now feels like evidence of expansion. The anxiety that once dominated now meets a guarded gate. In silence, integration deepens. In silence, identity roots. Do not rush this moment. Let the architecture solidify. Because once you speak affirmation, it will not be desperation. It will be declaration. You are not just someone who endured a spiritual surge. You are someone who stabilized it. You are not merely sensitive. You are attuned. You are not merely different. You are calibrated. Walk in the frequency. Do not apologize for it. Own the power, not arrogantly, but responsibly. Stand in your divine identity, not theatrically, but steadily. When the enemy reminds you of who you were, respond with coherence rather than argument. When old patterns attempt to resurface, return to posture and breath. When opportunities arise, filter them. When connections appear, discern them. You are no longer in rehearsal, you are in role. The 2,000-year silence that once felt abstract now feels personal because you were part of its ending. And as you move forward, remember that commission is not destination. It is daily discipline. But discipline grounded in Hupero peace does not exhaust. It strengthens, so stand firm. Carry the voltage faithfully. Guard your frequency wisely. Walk with steady authority. You are not dismissed back into waiting. You are released into alignment. And in that alignment, you will discover that the greatest miracle was not the activation itself, but the transformation from survivor to commissioned officer who knows exactly who they are and whose they are.